So as we continue our conversation, I do want to, as I had mentioned, say something about Nietzsche, what he said. And he had would you call it a poem, or he wrote a statement about the consequences of atheism. Even Nietzsche, as a philosopher, a genius, a very intelligent man, one of the great minds of all time, recognized that atheism would bring us to a place of a terrible place for the human beings, because we would break loose from all morality. We would have nothing, no objective standard to go by. And after that, we realized that Nazism and their death camps came up, and all this through the thoughts that he had developed. If we would look at Nazism, the leaders of that, Hitler, and then would pass around his writings. Now I want to read something that he wrote so we can understand his thinking. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace, and cried incessantly, "I seek God, I seek God." As many of those who do not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Had he gone on a long journey? And then he goes on and talks about how the sun and the moon lost their moorings, and who had buried God, and who can smell the death on God. And they didn't realize what they had did in burying God in their lives, or killing God out of their culture. Right. So he ends the thought with this. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke into pieces and went out. He says, I've come too early, he said. My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars require time. The deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. The deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars. And yet, they have done it themselves. So what he realized was, though he was a partaker in the killing of God out of the culture, they did not realize the consequences, the moorings, the letting loose of all barriers, and the brutality of humanity, and what was to come out of this. And he entered into the what we call the 20th century, and there was great violence among these governments that put away God, and there was much destruction.
Yes.
At the same time, there was another man living, Dostoevsky, sorry, and he was another great mind. And he counter-opposed. Two great minds were living at the same time. Einstein said that every scientist should read his books, because he was opposing the thinking of Nietzsche. Because the people in Russia at that time were thinking about their governments and how to overthrow it, and how that they, by overthrowing their government, could finally be liberated from this religious nonsense. But he was like a prophet, and he seen what destruction and havoc this would reap among the people. And so now we come to today, and in Russia, the vast majority of people still desire God. Although they tried to exterminate them and kill them stop their meetings. In China today, there's still, right today, there's a great revival of religion going on. Why is this? Because people have found out that when you do not have God, you're brought into bondage.
Yes.
This
Yes,
movement, go ahead, were you going to say something? This movement promised liberty but brought the people into bondage.
Yes.
I think of our young people today that the Western culture is about 100 years behind times. And now they're trying to take this on and say there's no God.
Right.
And instead of peace, people are greatly depressed. Suicide rates are up.
Right.
I heard a man say, Ravi Zacharias, the greatest thing that can happen to a human being to really bring him into depression is when all restraints from pleasures have been removed. And they try their great, what they thought would be great pleasure, only to be disappointed.
Yes. Right.
And then depression and suicide
Right.
and the lack of value of life sets in.
Yes.
And that's why we're in the predicament today. In reality, men who have said we'll be free have also brought us into bondage. And that's where we're at today.
It seems that, we look around today and it seems as though these things just suddenly happened. Like all of a sudden, 2 months ago, we're in this pandemic and now we're under this, it seems like an authoritarian control. But really, as you just mentioned about the 1800s and the men of the past, this has actually been a systematic undertaking. And that leads me to think that, and maybe I could see what the others would think here, is that there's something or someone in control beyond who we see.
That's right.
And people, leaders, they think so much that they're in control. Like president, or I don't know what his official title would be, Xi Jinping of China. He thinks he's in control, but something or someone is controlling him. Any government leader.
Right.
Any person. And so this is a plan to destroy people. Atheism is a plan, and it's progressive. And it's a progressive working of control.
Yes.
And uses fear to advance the control. Fear of, like for this case, getting sick with this virus, but also fear of disobeying. And this leads to increased fear, increased control, and increased oppression. I mean, even the violence, which we've seen in the past when we look at Germany, Russia.
Yes.
It's not just something that just kind of spontaneously happened.
I think as we go on just a little bit, they used to say that opium, you probably would have heard this in the Marxist doctrine, religion, the true opium is religion, but I want to say that the opium of the belief of the people is a belief in nothingness after death. And that's an opium that they're trying to give to the people to deaden all their senses of God. The most important people today are the most essential workers today are the Christians.
Yes. Yes, sir. That's true. Yes. Yes, sir.
To sadden my eyes today, someone sent a picture of a place of sexual toys and sexual things opened during this pandemic, but yet churches aren't open.
Right.
It tells us who's in control.
Yes. Right.
There's 54 million abortions in the world.
Right.
There's 10,000 abortions supposed to be in Ireland this year, and there's 1,000 people who died, or a little bit more than that, from this pandemic. But why have we forgotten them? They call for a national day of grievance. Why not a national day of grievance for the lost little children?
Right.
So we are moving towards an ideology that has failed in the past,
Yes.
and it will fail in the future.
Yes.
Insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting
Yes.
a
that's
different
right.
result.
Brother, can I just say something about bondage? You talked earlier about bondage. As we've seen, we've talked about different governments in the past that have used these types of ideology to control the people. And we would be tempted to look at that and think that'll never happen in our more informed society. The truth is that, as you said, this type of or this taking away God always results in bondage. And whether it's a more deceptive bondage or not, yet it is still control.
That's
It's
true.
bondage. You mentioned the young people, which is, an important topic to me as a young person. And I look at young people who are being controlled in the things that the way that they look at life, the way that their worldview,
Right.
all under the guise, it's so deceptive, it's a guise of free
Right.
thinking, and yet the things that they are allowed to say, the things they're allowed to think, are being carefully controlled. And it's a very, they would push it as freedom, but in reality it's a very restricted or bondage in their mindset. And so as you already said, that's a result of taking out God, and it's not something that's any better today. It may be more deceptive, but we see it at work
Yes.
in all of society.
Yes.
I heard a man recently say there was, speaking about pride and the lack of value of one's life, and he was speaking about a young lady who throws away her virginity and throws her life as if her life is cheap, as if what God has given her is cheap. And the reality is she has devalued her life.
Yes.
But in a
Right.
Christian view, we all have intrinsic value or great value because we're created in the image of God.
Yes.
And so now we're dealing with a government that doesn't see the value of God. We're dealing with a government that is playing God.
Yes.
And that's a very dangerous thing.
Yes.
When a government plays God and they tell us what's essential, what they tell us what's right and wrong. They tell us what we can do and what we cannot do. This is control, absolute control. And someone said this is a test for what's coming, what we're under right now. The stores are open, but Christians can't get together.
Right.
I mean, something's wrong here.
Absolutely.
It used to be a time when a country would be in trouble, they would call on God, and that would be the most important thing,
Yes, sir.
because we really need God back in society.
Right.
We have all the rooms all around us of this, and yet people aren't looking to God. We've never had such destruction in our lifetime.
It's true.
Because in reality, when you leave God, you enter into a death culture without hope.
Yes, sir.
And it's survival of the fittest. And if you don't fit their thinking of being the fittest, they can take you out.
Do you want to survive? Yep.
It's very true.
And so we live in a society that is on their way down, and it's trying to bring the people with them. Because if there is no God, we do not have any value.
That's right.
There's nothing that's not allowed. As these philosophers said, there's nothing that's not allowed. There's nothing that people can't do. And the human race without God is in an awful condition.
Yes.
I just remember as I mean, I guess it's been a while now, but when 9/11 occurred,
Mm-hmm.
in the United States anyhow, they were opening up the churches
Mhm.
everywhere for people to come in and pray.
Mhm.
And people were like asking God to help.
Yes, it's true.
Now we're in a situation, as Brother Patrick said, I think I read something recently today where someone made a comment about abortion. And it was in an editorial, and the commenter said, there goes those Bible bashers again.
Yes.
You know, so a totally different mindset
Mhm.
because of the influence of this thinking that's
Right.
taking over the minds of a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
How do we deal with that?
I think one of the motivations that we're dealing with today, that they're working, is the fear of death.
Yes.
Because people don't want to go into nothingness.
Right.
As I mentioned before, Dawkins said, and not only Dawkins, others philosophers said, if you have this view, you're building on the firm foundation of nothingness. You have to invent a lie for a purpose of life.
Yes.
And so, when men have such a fear of death, you can manipulate them
Yes.
Yes. That's right.
all you
That's
want,
right.
because this is all they have. We as Christians have eternity and a future and a
Yes.
hope and heaven.
Yes.
And life and death is just a transport to heaven. But they
Yes.
don't have that. Death is the end.
Yes.
Right.
And when man even just gets a little bump on them, or they think, oh, I got cancer, there's a great fear of death. And
Right.
though it's covered up by the looseness and even by this culture, they try to hide this
Yes.
under their alcohol and their drugs
That's right.
and their sexual looseness and their all their wickedness that they
Yes.
do. But there's really a fear of death under all of that.
That's right.
Because they really can't live with themselves.
Those are the essential services provided today, by the way. During
Yes.
this pandemic.
One of the essential services that was open today in the city center was called Soho, or is that it? Soho? And it provided sexual items for sale. I had it open, and the door was open today. A friend of mine sent me that picture, and I said, is that real?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, the door was open, and the sign was on, and I just took that picture today. That's an essential service. The liquor stores are open. Is that an essential service? There's a boy who committed suicide in the UK, 15 years old, because he said he couldn't take the isolation. What are we doing to people? What kind of culture do we have all over wife beatings and child abuse is up? What are they doing to us? So there's a scripture that says, for as much then as the children are partakers in flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had power of death, that is the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death were all their lifetimes
Yes.
subject to bondage.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
People are afraid of death, and you see that.
Mm-hmm.
6 feet apart,
Yes.
mask on, just told what to do without
Right.
no consideration. It's almost like we entered into a new phase of control over people. It's something that's never happened before. And but Christ
Yes.
entered into our sufferings.
Yes.
Lord.
And because he knew, thank God, he knew
Yes.
that we were going to die,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
died, and showed us how to die.
Yes.
Yes.
Rose the third day, historical fact. Rose the third day.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Sits on the right hand of God,
It's wonderful.
and delivered them who were through fear
Yes.
of death, were all their lifetime subject to bondage. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Subject to bondage.
Yes.
That was written way before the COVID-19.
Yes.
But people
Right.
are
Yes.
subject to bondage
Yes.
when they have fear of death. They're subject to being controlled. They're
Yes.
subject to being manipulated.
Yes.
They're subject to have sex shops open, and pastors can't, and ministers can't go around and feed their flock and
Right.
pray for the sick.
Right.
And we need a national day of prayer. That's what we really need, a
Yes.
national
Yes.
day of
Yes.
repentance
Yes.
and
Right.
prayer that God
Yes.
Yes.
would heal our land.
Yes.
So I wrote something here, and it's a quote from someone. They drowned because of the fear of death. They drowned their fears in the intoxicating bowl, whatever that might be. Sexual deviancy, impurity, drugs,
Yeah.
alcohol, gambling, pornography, social media. They drown their fears in this intoxicating bowl of iniquity. But all this, let me finish and I'll let you go. All this tends only to make death more terrific and awful when the reality of it comes. I call out to all those who deny God. The Bible says the fool in his heart say there is no God. They are
Right.
corrupt.
Yes.
They have done abominable works. There's none that do it good. I call to all them. There's hope in God. If we listen to man, they will bring us into bondage. But in Christ, there's hope.
Right.
And as we talked about depression or controlling people or oppression, and what really is an issue for me is that Brother Patrick talked about the fear of men and how they they are afraid of dying and
Yes.
how they are afraid of death,
Right.
but which is in some sense natural.
Mm-hmm.
And God
Right.
uses that to bring the people to Him, and
Right.
Right.
to let them really focus on God.
That's
Yeah.
And
right.
yet, what there is in this world, there's people who use the fear of death just for their benefit.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Right.
And like you
That's
can
what
see,
it
just
is.
with the same thing with COVID-19, there's like
Right.
a fear of people, and then where do we end? Like
Yes.
it benefits somebody else,
Yes, sir.
somebody that controls all of that.
Yes.
And really, and this is just a little thought, but really this reminds me of the people of Israel when they were in Egypt, and how the government there was actually without God.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
the depression or oppression, went
Right.
down and down. It went actually
Yes.
down to controlling
Right.
birth, just as
Yes.
we have today.
Yes.
Right.
It went
Good
down
point.
to
Good.
controlling manhood. It went down
Yes,
to
brother.
controlling families.
Yes, brother.
Right.
That's excellent.
And what did we have? We had people who were oppressed and had fear of actually living or of death, and that's what kept them going. And yeah, I think definitely the Lord is in control.
That's
Yes.
right.
And just as back then,
Yes.
There was deliverance.
it will implode in
Yes.
itself.
Amen.
Yes, brother. No, that's right.
Right.